Hi, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on confidently presenting your qualitative results chapter. It is afternoon where I am, but good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Rachel. I'm a senior qualitative mentor here at Statistics Solutions. We are a full service dissertation consulting company. So we are here to provide support for your dissertation at all stages, from topic development all the way through to the final dissertation defense. We have a pretty awesome team of qualitative, quantitative, and research mentors who are here to help out. Brittany is helping me today in the webinar, kind of behind the scenes. So in case of any technical difficulties, but she has also popped some great links to resources into the chat. So definitely check those out. Check out our website. We've got, like I said, a ton of really good free resources available at the Statistics Solutions website. You will also receive a copy of today's webinar in the next 24 to 48 hours, along with the slide deck. So don't worry about that. If you have come in a little bit late, you will still receive a copy. There's also a link in the chat to our webinar archive, so you can check out all of our past webinars and also take a look at what is upcoming. So if qualitative isn't quite right for you, we have a lot of other quantitative webinars, and then we also have webinars on things like your introduction chapter, your literature review, and your discussion. We also provide a complimentary 30-minute consultation so we can get to know a little bit more about you and your unique dissertation and research needs. You can email us at info@statisticsolutions.com to get scheduled. You can also use this link or go to our website where you can pick a time that is most convenient for you during our office hours. So again, I'm Rachel, I'm a qualitative mentor here at Statistics Solutions. This is Confidently Present Your Qualitative Results chapter. If you have questions as we move along today, go ahead and pop those into the question and answer box. I will leave time at the end that we can take questions on today's webinar. Again, this does cover qualitative. I am not a statistician, so if you have quantitative questions, those are best answered in either another webinar or, again, you can get scheduled to talk about how we can help you out. If there are questions about what we do at Statistics Solutions, sort of any of the services that we provide, Brittany can answer those throughout the webinar as well in the chat. So this slide presents not only an overview of the components of the qualitative results chapter, but it's also an overview of what we will be discussing today. So this is kind of the roadmap. Right? These are the major sections that should be included in your results chapter. So you'll want the introduction and the setting, demographic information about your participants, description of the data collection, a description of data analysis, your results, of course, which is the big, primary component of this chapter. There will be some discussion of trustworthiness and how you establish that in your study, and then a summary. One thing that I would like to point out before we get started, though, is if you have a template or a checklist from your chair, your department, your school, always default to that, right? You have enough hurdles to jump through as a graduate student as it is, so you don't want to make things more challenging for yourself by following something that is not quite what they want. Right? So always default to anything that you have from your school. Okay. But if you're still kind of in the weeds and don't know how to get started, this is for you. So in your introduction, what you want to do, and this is true of all chapters of your dissertation, and this is true as you move through the chapters as well is you want to be leaning back and then also looking forward. So in this way, you're holding the reader's hand, everything flows logically, they understand what came before this chapter, and then they understand what you will be presenting in this chapter. So in your introduction, you want to restate the problem and the purpose of your study. The purpose of your study needs to be written exactly the same, word for word, as it is presented everywhere else in your dissertation. This is not the time to get creative. Changing words changes meaning, and you do not want that to happen because that has greater implications for what you've studied, for your results. It can potentially throw things out of alignment. So restate the purpose of your study verbatim, just like everywhere else. And then you'll do the same for your research questions. Again, word for word, copy and paste into this section, okay, so that you're not tempted to change the wording at all. So think of this section as, it's a little recap of chapters 1, 2, and 3. And I do mean little recap. It's what does the reader need to know going forward into your results chapter, and then present a preview of the chapter. So what are those key sections, those components of the chapter that you will be discussing? So this is where you tell them what you're going to tell them. Okay, so this is how you want to set up that foundation for the results chapter in your introduction. Now, there are several sections in your results chapter that are going to look the same and might even use the same headings as what you proposed in your methods chapter. That's perfectly okay. This is where you describe any changes from what you have proposed. Okay, so in your methods chapter, you've talked about, sort of in a perfect world, if everything goes exactly according to plan, this is how you are going to conduct your research. And we don't live in a perfect world, and things never go according to plan. And so some things are going to change, and this is where you talk about how they change. So in the setting section of your results chapter, you want to talk about where you conducted the research and why that was important. So you're establishing the context for understanding your results. Any conditions that might have influenced your research or your participants. Okay, so this is where you really want to think through, did anything happen related to the setting of my study that might have impacted my results, my participants, or my interpretation of the results? So this is where you explain to the reader what actually happened when you were collecting data. Okay, so related to that setting. In your demographics section, you want to provide information about your participants. Again, we're establishing the context for understanding the results. And so you need to think carefully about what those important characteristics are of your participants that help the reader understand your study. So have you conducted an organizational leadership study, for example? And it's important that your readers know that your participants were of a certain level in the organization and that they had been with the company for a certain amount of years. So maybe it's not important that we know the age, for example, in this particular case. So maybe we don't need participants' ages, but we want to know how long they've been with the organization and what level they are, and maybe it's important to know gender identity as well. So you just want to think in the context of your study, what makes the most sense and what's going to help the reader understand. Okay. What you also want to do, though, and this is a bit of a balancing act, is maintain confidentiality, of course. So you don't want to provide so much information that someone could read this and they know who your participants are. Okay, so sometimes you have to obscure the information a little bit, or maybe present it in aggregate form so that you're not, aligning these demographic characteristics in such a way that the people are identifiable. In your data collection section, this again is where you want to describe the reality of what happened when you collected data. So how many participants were in your study that you collected data from? Where did you collect the data, the location, the frequency of the data collection? All of that is important. How it differed from what you proposed. How did you record the data? Okay, did anything unusual happen? This is where you might describe the global pandemic of COVID, right? That kind of has impacted everybody's research in the last couple of years. So this is where you outline any of those changes, any of those variations from what you proposed to do originally in your methods chapter. Okay, so if you were worried in your methods chapter that things might change and you didn't know how to handle it, then this is now how you handle it. This is where you describe what changed. You'll also include a section on data analysis. And again, in your methods chapter, you probably had a section for your data analysis plan, where you identified whatever the plan was for analyzing your data. So if it was a thematic analysis, then you maybe outline the steps of thematic analysis. Or if it was an interpretative phenomenological analysis, then in your methods chapter, you probably outlined the steps of that. Okay, but this is where you really get into how you applied that plan to your data, how you coded and categorized your data. Okay, how you're defining the codes, defining the categories. So really all qualitative analysis fundamentally comes down to reducing text, okay, and then building it into categories that are patterned, right? So making sense of all of this textual data. And so whatever this process is, you want to illustrate using your own data at this point. This is also where you will describe how you handled discrepant cases, if there were any, and there probably were. Okay, so discrepant cases or negative cases, that is when you identify a pattern, but something doesn't quite fit. Maybe a participant doesn't quite fit. And so this is where you would describe how you handle that in the analysis. We'll come back to this. So in the presentation of the results, and like I said, this is the big, main component of the chapter. And this is where I see a lot of variation as well from school to school. So, this webinar is based on the sections that I see most commonly across all of the schools and students I've worked with in the past. And so these are not always all going to be required. And in fact, sometimes the sections that I outlined prior to this are required to go in the methods chapter. Okay, so again, this is why it's really important that you check with your chair or your school for a template. Okay, but this is the section, this is the bulk of the chapter, your presentation of the results. So there are different ways to organize your results. They can be organized by research question. They could be organized by theme. And again, there are not hard and fast rules for this unless your school specifically says that they want to see it one way. And if that's the case, then that is how you do it, because that eliminates another hoop that you're going to have to jump through in the end. Okay, so you have to figure out what makes the most sense. So again, if you've conducted something like a thematic analysis or an interpretative phenomenological analysis, then it probably makes sense to organize your results around those themes or these superordinate themes. Okay, but that's not always the case. So you have to look at your own study and kind of make some decisions about this. The presentation of data should be in narrative form, okay, using mostly your own words. It's a narrative form, and then throughout that, you want to weave in supporting quotes, excerpts. Maybe you have something like photographs or drawings. Maybe you've done something a little bit, creative. You include those as well. Okay, so this is where you discuss your data. Okay, you're presenting what those patterns are, how you develop those patterns. Okay, and I say interpret here if appropriate, because this is not always where we interpret our data. Usually that comes in the discussion chapter, which most typically follows the results chapter. But there are certain types of qualitative data analysis that require greater interpretation in the results, in the presentation of the results. So if that is the case for you, then this is where it would be appropriate to dig in and provide that interpretation as well. And again, as a reminder, you want to be thinking about, is this logical? Is this clear to the reader? Think about holding their hand as everything unfolds. Okay, do my themes make sense? Are they supported by the data? Okay, do I have sufficient evidence that this is a theme, right? Using supporting quotes from participants. So back to then those discrepant cases or those negative cases. Like I said, this is where a participant varies a little bit, okay? Something that might disconfirm major findings or those patterns that you're seeing in the data. And usually it's not the case that you have, let's say you have 11 participants and you have evidence from all of them of 5 themes, and then you have a 12th participant and that person doesn't fit the pattern in any of those 5 themes. That's usually not what happens. It might be that in themes 2 and 5, this person had a different experience. Okay, so this is where you discuss, that's why I say in the context of the category. Okay, so within theme 2 or within theme 5, using this example, you would want to describe that experience. We can't just toss that person aside, right? We can't discard those data. That's not, it's an outlier, but it's not an outlier. That's not how this works, because it illustrates that there's variation in experience. Okay, and it might provide alternate explanations that might be very helpful, say in your discussion chapter. So you want to discuss any of these discrepant cases. Although most of this chapter will be narrative, so in written form, you might also use different ways to visualize the findings. My recommendations surrounding this are to use these sparingly. Certainly don't use them as filler. This is not the place to do that. You need to think carefully, does this make sense? Is it enhancing the reader's understanding? Okay, is this just a table for the sake of including a table, or is this showing something important for the reader to, to help them understand? So tables, figures, maybe maps or drawings, any of these might be appropriate for your study, but you need to use some discretion here. Okay, and the other thing too is that when you are presenting some type of visualization for your finding, you also need to describe that in the text. So if you are presenting a table, you can't just pop the table in there and not talk about it. It needs to be introduced, prior to the table. So, if it's like table X presents Y and Z, that's, you need to have something there that establishes like why you've put the table there, what it is doing for the reader. Okay. Same with any other visual, techniques. You'll also include a section on trustworthiness. And again, this is something that you probably talked about in your proposal, in your methods chapter. This is where you're going to revisit that discussion again and talk about what actually happened, how you actually just establish trustworthiness in your study. So, the confidence that you have that the findings are accurate, that they are applicable to other contexts, that there's some consistency there in terms of ability to be replicated, and that your findings are not based on you and your thoughts, but that they're based on participants. So we hear about these 4 tenets of trustworthiness in qualitative research: credibility, transferability, dependability, and confirmability. So again, if you had proposed to triangulate your data in your methods chapter, then you talk about how triangulation went. If you propose to conduct transcript verification to establish trustworthiness of your data, and after you conducted interviews, you could not get a hold of your participants again, and so they were unable to verify their transcripts, then you talk about that change, okay, and then maybe what you did instead. So again, this is where you talk about what actually happened. And then your summary section. So like all chapters of your dissertation, you will include a summary. This is not the place to phone it in, although I unfortunately see this happen sometimes. You want to, this isn't just a recap of, I presented this, and this section. You want to get into it a little bit more. So you're highlighting I would say the key findings, painting a picture of what was found. But think about this as your elevator pitch, right? So you have a paragraph, maybe 2, to get this information to your reader. If they didn't read any of the rest of the chapter, what do they need to know moving into your discussion? Okay, so you are recapping, but you want to dig a little deeper. And then you also want to provide a transition to the next chapter. So we've got the sections established for your results chapter. Okay, you know what needs to go in there. But what I hear really commonly is this larger question of, how do I even start? Where do I start? So this happens for a couple of reasons. And I think probably the biggest one is, by the time you get to chapter 4, realistically, let's be honest, it may have been years since you wrote your proposal. These things happen. I'm not judging. It took me forever. I wrote my proposal, and it was, oh my gosh, I mean, it was several years later before I was actually ready to write. And part of that was because my own field work took over a year. So this was, it was a long project. But, this happens. My point is, we sometimes get out of the habit of writing. And that can be one of the biggest challenges, I think, to getting started, is that we have to get back in the habit of writing. We have to establish the good writing habits. The other thing that happens is that writing your results chapter is different from writing your proposal. So your proposal, you're doing a lot of, literature review. You are writing about what others have done, what others have studied, what methodologies they've used. And that's not how the results chapter works. You're writing your own, results. So that can also be a challenge or a barrier to getting started because it's a different way of writing. So you have these two sort of challenges here to get over. So my advice to that end is that one, you are the boss of you and you don't have to start at the beginning. So even though this webinar has, we've talked about the different sections in linear order, there is no reason that you have to start with the introduction. Absolutely none. Maybe you're someone for whom writing the introduction is the way to go. Okay, because it provides that roadmap. So maybe you need to write the introduction so that you can lay out everything ahead of you. But maybe you're not. Maybe you're not that person. Maybe it's easiest to start somewhere in the middle. I'm not good at beginning with the introduction. That's just not like how my brain works. So when I'm writing, I just sort of start with whatever I feel like, honestly. And then I kind of go from there. And that's fine because you're getting work done, you're getting words on paper, and you are moving toward the mountain. So you do not have to start at the beginning. If you are not up for the challenge of writing up, say, an entire theme, maybe you make a table of demographic information or the low-hanging fruit. Okay. That is perfectly fine too, just to get you in the habit of doing something. You can make a table while you're watching TV or, doing whatever. It's still something that needs to get done. So you're still accomplishing something, right? Even though it seems sort of like piddly work, it doesn't feel as substantial, you are still moving closer to the mountain. You're getting something done. Motivation is never going to come to you. That is not how motivation works. You have to just go and do it. So even if you're working on these sections that feel like they're maybe less important somehow, hopefully that will start the motivation and the inertia that you need to keep going, right, with your writing. So that maybe tomorrow you feel awesome and you're like, yes, I'm going to write up themes 1 and 2. Okay. The other suggestion that I have is not to discount the importance of doing things like brainstorming and free writing. One of the things that helped me a lot was locking myself in my office, turning the notifications off on my computer, watch, phone, whatever, setting a timer for 15 minutes and allowing myself to write. So I would sit down with an open Word document. I would not censor myself. So I know it's really hard to think about writing without worrying about grammar and spelling, but that can be a real hindrance to getting started. And so if you just allow yourself to write, allow yourself to brainstorm, write about your topic, write what you're thinking, write what you're feeling, you would be shocked at how much you can accomplish, how much you can write in 15 minutes. This is unstructured writing. So not all of it is going to be good. Most of it might be crap. All of it might be. All of it might be garbage one day. But there might be a nugget or two the next day that you do this, that you're able to pull out of what you've written. And when you're doing some more formal writing, that you're able to use to generate new ideas. Okay. So it's really a matter of getting comfortable with your data, with your results, and getting comfortable writing again. If you're still feeling really stuck and don't know where to start, this is where we can come in. Okay, so again, we are Statistics Solutions. I'm Rachel. I'm a senior qualitative research mentor here. Statistics Solutions has been around for 23 years to provide dissertation consulting to graduate students like yourselves, right? To provide support and assistance through all stages of the dissertation process. So as I mentioned at the beginning, and you have these resources available in the chat as well as on this slide, we offer a complimentary 30-minute consultation to get to know you a little bit better, find out about your own unique research needs and how we can help out. So you can call us, you can email us, you can go onto our website. There's also a link in the chat, I believe, to get yourself self-scheduled for a time that's convenient for you during our office hours. You know, just to talk a little bit more about how we can help you get through the process and on with your life. So we do have time for questions. It looks like there's, yep, so there is, again, a lot of links to resources in the chat, a lot to our website, statisticsolutions.com, which provides a lot of really good information for qualitative and quantitative studies, in addition to other you know, assistance with things like the lit review, the discussion chapter. You can also take a look at our webinar archive and then the webinars that we have coming up as well. I have a comment in the chat, the personal approach. Yeah, I think that's really important. This is one of the reasons why I love doing this webinar. It's one thing to hear what needs to be included, but that's when people say, you know, what do I do? I don't think that's what they mean. There's this other piece of getting over the hurdle and getting started to writing this chapter that is so important, right? So I've been through this process. A lot of us here at Statistics Solutions have been through this process, so we know what it's like, and you know, can speak from personal experiences and sort of what worked for us. I have a question about, do we also offer editing of the final file? So I'm assuming you're talking about like APA editing, and we do provide that. It's something that, you know, if you wanted to schedule a consultation, we could talk more about what specifically you were looking for. Yeah, so what other questions can I help out with? Oh, I'm so glad that this was helpful. I would have loved something like this when I was working on my results chapter, that is for sure. So I know the feeling sort of lost and alone and not knowing what you don't know and where or how to start. I get it. It is possible. I will tell you that you can do this. You can all do this. Any other questions? And so again, for those who did come in late, this and for everyone else as well, you will receive a copy of this in the next 24 to 48 hours, as well as the slide deck. So you can review it at your leisure, come back to it. Well, thank you all so much for joining me. Again, it's afternoon for me, but probably morning or evening for some of you. sometimes professors can make everything sound so complicated. Yes, this is true. I agree. And it doesn't have to be complicated. Yeah. Okay, well, happy writing. Good luck. I know that you can do this. Have a great weekend. Oh, I do have a question. It looks like that just popped up. Do we offer writing groups? So we don't. It is one-on-one consulting that we do. So we could, one option would be to kind of set up something like a support along these lines, but it would be one-on-one. Okay, take care, everyone. Have a great weekend. Thanks for joining me.